After talking to Packers players in San Francisco at Super Bowl 60, their position on how to fix the Packers' big game problems is clear. It's a mindset issue, and maybe not the mindset you think.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google, wherever you get podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better place to follow them with a bet on FanDuel. Play your game. I talked to a handful of Packers players on and off the record about what this team needs to do to take that next step. We're clearly going to talk about that. We're talking about Romeo Doubs, who we talked to last week, about his future, because it was reported the Packers might try to work out something with him, at least gauge where he is. By the way, something we reported over at The Leap last offseason, that the Packers had some conversations with Romeo Doubs, and we're back with a mock draft Monday. But let's start where every conversation that I had started last week when I was in San Francisco. Radio Row was a blast. It was an absolute madhouse there, a smaller venue than I think normally it would be, or maybe there were just more people there than normal because we were butt to butt in that place. It was wild. But two things stood out to me, or at least two things that fit together. And that is when I asked Evan Williams about that proverbial next step, how do they finish these games? What he said was detail. And that was the phrase that we talked about with Jonathan Gannon, that he was going to come in and bring a level of detail that maybe this team didn't have before. What Christian Watson said was they needed to be more intentional over the course of the week. And he was saying, I'm going to let the coaches handle the coaching part, but the players need to be more intentional with the way they prepare. Both of those things, to me, are mindset. And look, no one is gonna say, oh, well, they're just a young team anymore. But to me, this screams young team, figuring out what it takes in the playoffs to get where they want to get to. And I've said this before, and I will say it again. I think Matt LaFleur and Jeff Hafley combined, as you know, in terms of offensive and defensive minds, that is one of the best 1-2 punches that any team in the NFL had last season. So in terms of coaching, I don't think this was a coaching problem per se. Certainly coaching is related here. And I don't think this was an intensity problem. I've also made it very clear, I don't think intensity is a coaching issue. I think intensity is a player issue. But when I hear Christian Watson say we need to be more intentional, when I hear Evan Williams say that then we need to be on our details, what I hear is two players saying that the team was not quite as prepared as they needed to be to win that football game. And maybe in years past, the same thing is true. And so that has to be, at least in some measure, a reflection of coaching. Because it is ultimately the coach's job to prepare the football team. But Evan Williams mentioned coverage busts. Well, that's not necessarily a coaching problem. When you cover everybody for 3 quarters and then in the fourth quarter have 4 or 5 coverage busts, is that the coach's fault? No, you were prepared. You know what the responsibilities were. You didn't do the job. That's what the money's for. And to me, that is a team that is young, even if they have experience. A young team full of talented players, which is what the Packers have. They might say, I need to make a play here. it becomes, and not even in a selfish way, but just like, look, the game is starting to unravel. Unravel was the phrase that Jordan Love used on Radio Row. I need to make this play, and that can cause you to be a little overly aggressive. That can cause you to get out of position. That can cause you to make a mistake that you might not otherwise make if you were, say, a little bit more experienced. Maybe you would trust the scheme a little bit more. Sometimes it is just something that comes from maturity and experiences. And you hate to have to be an experiential learner in a case like this. You hate to have to fail over and over and over. But when I look at a team like, for example, the Seahawks, they have plenty of young players on that team. But someone like Julian Love is a very experienced football player. Sam Darnold, I know he didn't have to do a lot in the Super Bowl, a very experienced football player. And I would rather have Jordan Love than Sam Darnold. And the Packers didn't lose because of Jordan Love. But Leonard Williams, one of the stars of that Seahawks defense, someone who has played a lot of football in the NFL. The Packers just don't have a lot of those kinds of players. Now, Xavier McKinney is not part of the problem here. He's played a lot of football. He's not the guy that's busting these coverages. It's, a Keyshawn Nixon coverage bust here, an Evan Williams coverage bust here. Rasheed Walker, experienced football player, has played 4 years of NFL football. He's still a young player. And one of the reasons why he was a 7th round pick is questions about his maturity, questions about his football IQ. I don't think all of the issues that he had in the second half against the Bears were about maturity. He just didn't play well. But some of that is poise. Poise is a reflection of maturity. The game, when it gets a little tight, are you able to find a way to make those plays? Matthew Golden, not an experienced football player, but the stage was never too bright for him. He was poised in the face of adversity. You don't have to be old to be a poised football player. But I think this is a Packers team that has not always been poised, has not always played disciplined. And again, that is a combination to me of coaching. You can only, as a coach, take a player so far. Now, would it be nice for the coaches to have some answers? Yes. When you see your team is not poised, where are the leaders on this football team to come forward? Where are this is why you need your stars. We talked about this in the middle of the season, guys. The ability for this team to when they're blowing these games, it'd be really nice to have some star players who can just come through and make you right. If the Packers had Micah Parsons against the Chicago Bears the second time, I think they win. If the Packers had Micah Parsons in the playoff game, I think they win because he makes one play. That 4th and 8 maybe doesn't happen. You win. One drive, one possession changes, and you win. And you need your star players. So in a way, this also comes back to just being healthy. Maybe if you have Tucker Kraft on that last drive, he catches, a big play ball. Just that trickle-down effect certainly impacts what happens for the Packers in winning and losing. And it takes being healthy at the right times for this to all work out. And so when you invest in someone like Tucker Kraft, who I don't think has ever been accused of not being ready to meet the moment, when you don't have Zach Tom, who we've seen now 2 playoff games go to pot because he's not out there. The 49er game in 2023, the Packers are in full control of that game. They have to make changes along the offensive line because Zach Tom goes out. And all of a sudden, the pass rush is eating the Packers up. If Zach Tom plays against the Bears, maybe you can slot Jordan Morgan in for Rasheed Walker, and maybe he plays better. Maybe he doesn't. Remember, we're talking about a guy who, would have been making maybe just his second start at left tackle in the NFL. But it has not looked too big for him in these moments. There have been some physical issues. There have been some technique issues. But poise has not been the problem. This Packers team, they have to be preparing the right way. You have to go through the week and be locked in on every detail so that when the game comes, that stuff carries over. When Christian Watson says intentional, that's about guys during the week taking that preparation seriously and not going, we're just better than the Bears. We can roll the ball out there and be better. And guess what? For a half, they came out focused. And then I think they lost some of that focus and were not able to recover it. So you hope another year of these failings for this football team, 3 years in a row in the playoffs, they come up short. That for the guys who have been here and whoever they add, that they come to a different place when this is all said and done. Now, Romeo Doubs played terrific in that playoff game. I don't think he's coming back, though. That being said, the Packers might try to bring him back. Is that feasible? What does that look like? We'll talk about it next. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care most about, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast. An incredible double peel from Team USA. What a moment. Curling, not always the most engaging and heart-pounding moment, but then you get a moment like that. And that's why you watch. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. Every niche event becomes must-watch because you're fully locked into the competition. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better place to follow them than with FanDuel. Play your game. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen, and thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out the Everydayer Club. The Discord, our group chat, is always a hotbed of conversation. I wasn't really locked into what was going on while I was at Super Bowl, and guess what? The conversation stayed flowing in the group chat. Be a part of it. LockedOnPackers.supercast.com gets you ad-free access to Locked On Packers, plus the group chat in all of it. So come hang out with us there. We talked to Romeo Doubs last week, and he was cagey about his future. It was reported over the weekend from Jeremy Fowler that the Packers would at least engage with Romeo Doubs in discussions about a contract. Spotrac has his projected value at around $12 million per year. Khalil Shakir signed for something around that number, 4 years, 48, something like that. I think just at the outset, I have to make it clear here what I've been saying for a year. And that is, I do not think, A, that the Packers will re-sign Romeo Doubs. And that B, I don't think it makes sense to re-sign Romeo Doubs. When the Packers went into the draft and took not one, but two receivers in the top 100, including a first-round pick, they were signaling to us what they think the future of their receiver room is. And then, by the way, they extended Christian Watson. Christian Watson and Matthew Golden are the future of this football team at the receiver position. Savion Williams is very much TBD. But if Savion Williams is going to do the things Jaden Reed is good at with some of the gadget stuff, the jet sweep stuff, he didn't get as many of the receiver screens and manufactured touches as I thought he would get. But part of that is Jaden Reed came back a little faster from injury than maybe we thought. But even when Reed wasn't out there, Savion Williams wasn't getting those kinds of touches. They were doing wildcat stuff and some receiver screens as well. I didn't think Savion was electric doing that. He did have that nice touchdown run, about a 20-yard touchdown run on a receiver screen where he made a couple guys miss. Matthew Golden had a similar play against the Bears in a big spot. But Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed, this is the offseason to extend those guys. You don't want them going into free agency next year. Now, I could see a situation where the Packers say, hey, Jaden Reed, play well, stay healthy, and, about October, we'll start having these discussions again. I could see that. I think Dontavian Wicks, this is going to be Wicks' last season in a Packers uniform. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to trade him this offseason. That would not be surprising to me at all, especially if they think Savion Williams is someone who can really help them. Maybe you see a Wicks trade in, September, October as the trade deadline approaches. The case for Romeo Doubs is this is still the guy that in the red zone and on third down, Jordan Love is looking to. In big spots, he's the guy that they trust to go make a play. Now, on a number of occasions this year, when the Packers really needed a play, fourth down against the Bears in the playoffs, fourth down against the Cowboys early on in the season, late against the Bengals, Love found Matthew Golden in big spots for chunk gains. And so you draft Matthew Golden to be that guy, to be the guy that replaces your go-to guy as the go-to guy. That being said, $12 million is just not very much money for an NFL receiver, for a starting caliber receiver, for someone who has been as integral to this offense as Romeo Doubs has been. Now, when you think about what Christian Watson got, Christian Watson, I think the Packers had to make a decision when they signed him. Is it going to be Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson? Christian Watson's extension is $11 million. It can get to 13 and change. If that's the Romeo Doubs market, I have to assume that what the Packers decided there was, of the two, Christian is the guy that makes the most sense for this team. I happen to agree. As I mentioned, we reported last spring that the Packers had some initial discussions with Romeo Doubs. They know where Doubs is looking. I think what this reporting suggests is that Romeo Doubs would like to come back. He told us last week in San Francisco he would like to be back in Green Bay, thought it was special to be a part of that receiver room and really loves playing with Jordan Love. But there are receiver needy teams out there that are going to have a lot of money to spend. The Raiders and the Titans each come to mind. The Raiders are going to be adding Clint Kubiak, reportedly. That is a LaFleur type system. So Romeo Doubs would be able to hit the ground running there. Similar thing in Tennessee where Robert Saleh comes from that tree. Now, Brian Daboll is going to come in and not be a LaFleur tree offense. But that team, who's catching passes there? They need some help for Cam Ward. You put an offense together for a young quarterback, you better have some receiving options. And what we've seen teams do over and over again when they have a young quarterback, especially heading into year 2, year 3, is they go out and they spend money. It's not just going to be draft picks. It's going to be money too, where you have to go out and say, all right, these are the guys that can help the young quarterback, that can help our guy. And you go from there. And Romeo Doubs is exactly that kind of player. He's going to be in the right situations. You expect him on third down and in the red zone to make those catches. I know he had some drop issues, and he's not the player that the Packers sometimes treat him. And I actually think his departure in some ways helps this team because Jordan Love is not going to lock in, I've got Romeo Doubs one-on-one over here. I'm going to take my vertical shot. That's just not historically been something that has been fruitful for the Packers. There are some big exceptions, to be sure. But I would much rather, if I'm the Packers, see Matthew Golden in that situation or Christian Watson in that situation. We've seen the Packers make that work as well over the last season and a half, going back really to 2023 with Christian Watson. Is there a number where this makes sense for the Packers? I think that depends on what else they think they're able to do. You might say to Romeo Doubs, go out there, see what the market is. If you're going to get $15, $16, $18 million a year over 3 or 4 years, we're just going to be blind out. Like, sorry, we can't do that. But if it's going to be 10, if it's going to be 12, come back on a 1-year deal, get the Christian Watson deal. Now, the Packers, maybe that doesn't make sense for the cap just because of what the cap numbers are going to look like. It wouldn't be guaranteed money, but if it's 1 year for 11, you'd have to put some void years in there to make that work. And I just don't know what the Packers' appetite for something like that would be. Maybe if you don't think, you're going to bring back Dontavian Wicks, or if you want to use Dontavian Wicks around the draft as a trade piece, you go, hey, come sign a 2-year for 20 and, see what your market is like in 2 years. I do think there's a number at which this makes sense. But again, it depends on what you think the options are out there for you. And it depends on what you think the rest of your roster is going to look like. If you think having, and I do, having Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, with whatever you're going to get from the other guys, Reed, Wicks, Williams, that's enough to go make a Super Bowl run, I do, then you wish Romeo Doubs the best and you move forward. And I don't think you're going to engender any ill will from Doubs or his agency if you say, look, we just think that your market is going to be such that we can't get into that business. And it wouldn't be the first time that the Packers have handled a situation like this, like that. All right, we've got a mock draft Monday. Let's do that next on Locked On Packers. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that fit part is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, before we do the mock draft, I got a chance to talk to Mike Mayock last week about the Super Bowl teams and the way that they are built. And I thought, what better primer could we have than a former GM talking about the way you build a Super Bowl team to get into our discussion with the Packers and this mock draft Monday. Let's hear what Mike had to say.
I'm here with former general manager, longtime TV pro, and now with Sumer Sports, Mike Mayock. And Mike, fascinating matchup in the Super Bowl this week. And two Ron Wolftree general managers that put those teams together. Is there a through line you see in terms of the way these teams are put together?
You know what I like? This is the first interview today, and I've done maybe 10 already, where they've asked me about the general managers. And I've tried to kind of force it in because I think they've put their rosters together in two different ways to get here, but spectacular job by both. I mean, let's start with New England and a direct descendant of the Wolf, Elliott Wolf. And what they've done, I mean, they turned over their offensive line, 4 of the 5 positions. 2 were draft picks, 2 were free agents. I mean, low-level free agents, okay? They've done a really nice job with, 6 of their starting defensive players are free agents.
Yeah.
So they hit the free agents hard, and they spent a lot of money. But what I loved as a former GM is they did it intelligently, meaning, okay, you pay Milt Williams a lot of money. But Kairos Tonga right next to him was just a blue-collar, tough guy, but just as important to their success. You spend some money on Spillane, the linebacker. You know what? Another glue guy. Smart, tough, great in the locker room. Carlton Davis, defensive back, spent a little money. That's okay. Milt Williams spent a lot of money. So they did it different ways, but Elliott did it both draft and also in free agency and trades.
So when you look at the Seahawks and the way that they're built, they'll play little. They'll play not little because they have Nicky Manwari.
Yeah.
But they play the way a lot of colleges play. They'll play nickel, big dime.
Yep.
And we're seeing that trickle up now from the college game. Why do you think it's taken so long for those things to trickle up?
I think what happens in the NFL is for instance, I'm laughing because a lot of teams are running the ball now.
Yeah.
Right? So my whole thing 5 years ago is we're going to start to see offenses get bigger and stronger because defenses have reacted by getting smaller, quicker, and lighter. And that's what we're seeing now. 6 offensive linemen, extra tight end, fullback, all that. We're seeing that around the league now to take advantage. And I think it's a similar situation. Seattle has drafted well. They've got guys that are versatile. Manwari, you've already mentioned. Witherspoon. They've got guys who can play inside and outside, cover tight ends, move back out again. And I think they're a little bit, are they going to play shell coverage and all that? Yeah, for the most part they are. But I love the way they target by game plan each week a different scheme.
All right. I love the insight there. I do think the Packers are going to have to add to their linebacker room. I think they're going to have to add to their corner room. I think they're going to have to add to their defensive front. So with that in mind, let's do this, as live as we can be as we move through here. And what I think is when you have the Packers picking at 52, we're going to do a 4-round mock. Let's enter the draft here. We're going to use the Pro Football Focus simulator, and we get to where the Packers are. Colton Hood is the number 1 player on the PFF board here. 6 foot, 195. He's a redshirt sophomore. This, straight away, this seems like a no-brainer for the Packers. Now, Keontae Scott from Miami is also here. Redshirt senior, played in a lot of big games. D'Angelo Pons, the corner from Indiana, also here, but he's little. 5'9", 173. So right now, this is just who do you like the best? And I think Colton Hood is someone that you're absolutely going to have to keep your eye on here for the Packers at 52. I think corner makes a ton of sense. So let's go ahead and take Colton Hood. You've got what I think is the Packers' most pressing need taken care of. So this is why we like to do this live. So here at 84, I'd love to be able to get a defensive tackle. I would have loved to get a defensive tackle, a big space-eating dude at 52. The top guys on the board are all skill position players here. Jonah Coleman, the running back from Washington. Emmett Johnson, the running back from Nebraska. Zachariah Branch, the receiver from Georgia. Justin Jolly from North Carolina State. The tight end, Deion Burks, the receiver from Oklahoma. A lot of options here for the Packers, but not guys that I think are really going to intrigue them, given what they need and where this team is trying to get to. Now, Jacob Rodriguez is someone that I had just drafted. And I think that Jonah Coleman at 5'9", 228, a little bit more of that, power back for the Packers. Maybe they want a true Josh Jacobs replacement. That could make sense. Also, Chase Bizantis from Texas A&M, a guard. He's 6'5", 315. Now, we would have to see how he tests. Could you just draft someone like this and they move them from guard to center and just go? Now, Sam Hecht, who is a center, 6'4", 300, right in that range of where we normally see the Packers like to be. They tried the big player with Josh Myers. It didn't work out great, though Josh Myers played pretty well for New York last year. They're trying to get these bigger guys. Could they do something like take an interior offensive lineman and say, well, this is where this guy is going to play. He played tackle in 2023. They like that. Played guard the last 2 seasons. Has never been a center. Do they want to with a 3rd round pick, their 2nd pick? Do they want to engage in that level of project, or someone like Sam Hecht, who has been a 2-year starter at Kansas State at center? Does that make more sense to them? If I can't get a tackle and I've already drafted Jacob Rodriguez, I think it's too early for a running back. I like the idea of taking Sam Hecht here, so let's go ahead and do that. And then as the Packers sit here 120 in the 4th round, Austin Barber is the number 1 player on the board here. He's a tackle. There is some developmental quarterbacks like Cape Kludnick. That's not going to work. Damon Claiborne, the halfback from Wake Forest, is an interesting option here. 5'10", 195. Another corner, Julian Neal, who I think the Packers, at 6'2", 208, that's right in their wheelhouse in terms of size. Do they want to just take another guy? Bo Stevens, someone that I think the Packers are going to have a lot of interest in, someone that a lot of Packer fans are going to be interested in. Iowa, 6'5", 315. I think that makes a ton of sense. But Albert Regis, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, he's 6'1", 317, a little shorter than the Packers generally like, but this is a run-stuffing defensive tackle. This is a nose tackle body type. I think the Packers have to have someone like that. And he was someone who was a primarily B-gap player. So not just a nose tackle, but did play some true nose. Run stop win rate, in the 90 plus percentile. Run defense grade up there. I think this makes sense for the Packers. And now you've hit all your big spots. All your big spots. You get a corner, you get an interior offensive lineman, you get a defensive lineman. I think this is a really good draft for the Green Bay Packers. And I would be excited if this is where they landed. We'll see exactly what they're thinking much later in the offseason. Back tomorrow as we get set to dive into free agency. The NFL Combine is already around the corner. So plenty more here on Locked On Packers as we stay 5 days a week through the offseason. If you're someone who likes to be here for all these through the offseason, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Go to LockedOnPackers.supercast.com. You get ad-free access to the Green Bay Packers podcast here, Locked On Packers, and our group chat. Follow me on all the social media. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube so you can always stay Locked On Packers.